So today I just wanted to do kind of an informational video. I had somebody ask a question about slow versus fast twitch fibers, and if that can change. So I just wanted to give a little detail there. So obviously when we're talking about muscle, we're talking about skeletal muscle. So there's also cardiac muscle in the heart, and there's smooth muscle in the internal organs. But generally in this field, when we're talking about muscle, we're talking about the skeletal muscle. And that's made up of muscle fibers. So I'll of course include a picture here. So you have an individual muscle fiber, numerous muscle fibers together, then come into a fascicle, and then you have larger and larger units until you have the muscle itself, what we think of as the muscle. Inside the muscle, you have satellite cells. You might have heard people talk about satellite cell proliferation, and basically satellite cells will migrate into the muscle and become a myonuclei, myo meaning muscle, and nuclei, so basically a nucleus within the muscle. And the more satellite cells that a muscle fiber has, generally it's perceived that the more potential there is for growth. So as one trains, they can increase this number of nuclei in the muscle. This is actually one of the reasons that people believe muscle memory works, because obviously if you have to put on 10 pounds of muscle for the first time, that's going to take a very long time. But if you already had that muscle and you just detrain for a little while, that 10 pounds of muscle comes back much faster. And one of the speculations on that is because the satellite cells have already migrated into the muscle, they're there basically permanently. And so then you can gain that muscle back at a much faster rate. So I won't go into all the anatomical details specifically, but just kind of know that muscle fibers and the fascicles are arranged in a certain way. Unipennate, bipennate, multipennate are just examples there. And how they are arranged can affect the amount of force that a muscle can exert during contraction. Now, kind of going to the original question I had, the slow versus fast twitch. Traditionally we had placed it into type 1, type 2A, and type 2X, with type 1 being what we think of as slow twitch. So you see an endurance runner, you tend to think they're very slow twitch dominant, or they're type 1 dominant. And then type 2A and type 2X would be fast twitch oxidative and fast twitch glycolytic respectively, with 2A obviously being more moderate and then the 2X being on the extreme end. But as more research has come out, it seems that this is more of, these three categories are more of a sliding scale, and there actually are intermediate fibers between them. So you can just think of, again, the more slow it is, the closer to type 1, the more its endurance capacity, and the more it's closer to 2X, the more there's that power capacity where it is fatigued more quickly. And even for a given individual, you will tend to use some over the others depending on the activity. So if you're just doing a light walk, then you slowly get into a jog, and then you get into a run, and then you get into a sprint. During that period, you will be using more and more of those fast twitch fibers. The fast twitch fibers have this increased contraction velocity, and the increased contraction velocity is what allows them to maximize their power output. Additionally, people tend to think of these fast twitch fibers as the fibers for having the most potential for growth, but the reality is that all muscle fibers have potential for growth. And if you look at let's say a bodybuilder doing traditionally more high reps compared to a purely power athlete, they will have very enlarged type 1 muscle fibers and more enlarged slow twitch muscle fibers. So it's definitely not accurate to think that you should only try to train fast twitch fibers to get the most growth, when in reality all of these fibers have the potential for growth, and if you want maximum hypertrophy, you should try to maximize the size of all of them. And in response to training, muscle fibers will change, and so not only in the absolute cross-sectional area, but also the proportions. So again, as I mentioned, if you are doing more endurance type work or higher rep work, you will have a different proportion of slow twitch versus fast twitch fibers. And so it has been shown, they used to think that there was no conversion from one to another. But again, it has more recently been shown, I think you look at some of the work by Dr. Andy Galpin, that there is change from one fiber type to the next, especially in those intermediate fibers. Now, having said that, there is still a big genetic factor here. If you were born to be an elite sprinter and you had very predominantly fast twitch fibers, that is going to be a different makeup than somebody who was born to be an endurance runner with predominantly slow twitch fibers. And the type of training you do will change that to a degree. But, if you are almost entirely slow twitch, you're not going to become almost entirely fast twitch. There are going to be changes. And as I mentioned, Dr. Galpin has shown that. but there are limits. Another misconception is that weight training is going to make you all of a sudden almost entirely fast twitch. And actually, in standard bodybuilding and athletic training, there is a shift from these most glycolytic, these 2X fibers to 2A fibers. Again, I mean, you are doing higher reps most of the time. You're not just doing like 1-rep maxes. So there are going to be changes, but they're not necessarily the changes that people expect. And I think when you get to the practicality of it, this is all interesting to know if you like to really delve into it. But is it really going to change how you're training that much? You know, it's not going to change the principles that we know work well over time. So training will increase the rate of force development of the muscle fibers, and there will be some conversion of muscle fiber types, but it's not the case that you will just all of a sudden have almost entirely 2X fibers. And one final point to make is just that it's also going to depend on the muscle group that you're talking about. So just as an example, the lower body tends to display a higher preponderance of slower twitch fibers on average. Now again, there are going to be individual differences, and even within the lower body, different muscles are going to be more or less slow twitch. For example, the soleus of the calf muscle is going to be generally more slow twitch than the gastroc, even though both are predominantly slow twitch. So like I said, I just wanted to make a short video here just in response to that question. I don't think this sort of information is really going to be necessary for somebody to make progress in the gym. It's just one of those things that if you've always heard about different muscle fiber types, this can clarify a little bit and kind of explain what we mean when we're talking about them.